What is up to my beautiful parenting and noir tribe? This is Alicia coming to you. And if this is your first time, I am a solo parent, current expat in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. I created this channel as a way to bring realism to the parenting journey for a lot of people that may be living life and feeling a bit unseen and wondering how to relate to the lives that they have, the lives that they have with their children, their partners, and other things. And so I often want to reach out and to really share some of the journey on which I find myself and hoping that it will stoke a bit of inspiration for other people. I'm going to pause for a few moments just to see if we'll be getting anyone in our audience and then we'll get started. But very happy to be here and happy Juneteenth for those who are joining and who celebrate. For those of you who may not know what Juneteenth is, it essentially marks the emancipation of the last enslaved Black people in the United States. On June 19th, 1865, over 2.5 years after the actual Emancipation Proclamation freeing slaves. Um, and so I'll talk a little bit more about that relevance in a moment. But as I said, I'm going to give it a minute to see if we get a few audience members. Right. I'm just confirming, making sure I don't have any audio difficulties. So if anyone's in the audience, please let me know if you can't hear me. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Um, and as I said, before diving into the topic of the day, I did want to give moment of pause and commemoration for Juneteenth, as I said. Um, the commemoration of this day is really a powerful reminder of how long justice can be delayed, but not denied. It talks about the resilience and the resistance and the joy that many of us in the Black community have carried forward ever since. And I think as we celebrate Black freedom today, we're also called to stay vigilant. In this current political landscape in which we find ourselves, where books are being banned, history is being erased or attempting to be erased, because the history is in the people and not in the books. So you can take them away, but we have oral historians and we will continue our legacy. But also, rights are under attack. Our voices, our votes, our bodies, in some instances, and our vision for what justice means and why it matters. And the truth is, it matters more than ever right now. So I hope today has been not just a remembrance for those of you who celebrate Juneteenth. And again, I feel that any and all should. Um, it is a recommitment for us to our truth telling without any filters, to our seeking and establishing and maintaining communities, and also to us building up a future that's going to be rooted in dignity and liberation for us all. So I'm very thankful to be having this discussion on a day like today, because I think to tie into the message that I wanted to get across, there are some things that often when you think about people who live abroad, you think about all the wonderful upsides. You think about the beauty of a place, perhaps the cost of living. In some instances, there's a slower pace of life. And yes, there are many of those amazing things. You see tons of dreamy Instagram or Facebook posts that show colorful scenery, sunset rooftop views, and other things. And those are very real. But I think one of the things that often doesn't get enough airtime are the challenges of living abroad. I've been living abroad a little bit over 9 months now, and so for my ladies in the audience who have or are mothers, you recognize that that's almost a gestational period. I'm working towards birthing the thing that I have been seeking for quite some time. And so it gives me pause to be at the point where I'm not quite a year in, but I'm close enough to what one would consider the birthing time interval. And so I wanted to be sure to highlight some of the challenges that I faced during this time period. I've enjoyed tremendously the opportunity to live here in Mexico, in particular San Miguel de Allende. If you look back at some of my other videos, I talk about the area and the reasons why I've chosen this city as my adopted home. But I think there is indeed that other side to the story. And so this video today is for anyone who's considering a move and wondering, well, what is the hard stuff that no one really talks about? Are there things I need to be prepared for that don't quite get airplay? And so whether you're dreaming about moving to Mexico, whether you're actively planning it, or you're already here and you're just looking for someone who gets it, this one is for you. And you will see many of the concepts that I'm going to talk about are very interrelated and really show the connectedness of ideas and experiences you have and how they can bridge different topics. I made a series of notes so that I can be sure to dive into them, but I'm happy to field any questions as they come up. And also, if you're looking at this in the future, hello, as Stephanie Perry would say, I hope it's nice there. Um, and so please feel free to comment with some of your thoughts you have, some of your experiences. I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. But let me go ahead and dive in a little bit. So I think it doesn't hurt to start with the obvious language, language barriers. So I have said before, I've had high school and a little bit of college experience with Spanish, and that was quite a few decades ago. Don't want to date myself too much, but it's been a number of years. And so I had no illusions that I would be fluent right away. I expected a learning curve in getting here, being on the ground, and learning the language as we go. But I think what I didn't expect was how much energy it would take just to live day to day in a place where I can't fully express myself or understand what's going on around me yet. And that's not to say that this isn't a continuing journey. But again, I did not necessarily factor in how much that would take a toll. I think simple things like asking for something, how much it costs, trying to explain something to a service provider, or in turn, hearing back their responses in terms of the things you need from them. As simple as even trying to make new friends that are not English speakers. All of these things become really, really complex. Um, I think you don't recognize that language gap, that language barrier, it adds a layer of stress to things that would be really simple back home. And if you're someone like me who prides themselves on being articulate, confident, able to express themselves and get a point across easily, it's humbling at its best to suddenly find yourself almost muted and sometimes sitting back and listening and observing and perhaps being lost because you don't know what's going on. And to be honest, it can wear on your thinking or your confidence in terms of, am I getting this? And then you recognize a few words here or there, and you're like, "Wait a minute, I know more words today than I did yesterday or last week." Um, but it is a real thing that many people are not they're not prepared for. So I think one of the biggest pro tips that I wish I'd leaned into more on my journey to get here is to start practicing the language that you may be going to encounter in the country you're going to, if it's not a predominantly English speaking country. I can't emphasize enough that even 10 minutes a day, listening to a podcast, doing for some people Duolingo, something so that you start to pick up the vocabulary, but more importantly, the verbs and things along those lines will really help you. I've said before in Mexico, people are really warm and friendly. They're patient, they're kind. If they see you struggling, they pause, they wait for you to um, ask the question. If you pull out your phone, Google Translate, and often we're doing verbal conversations back and forth versus trying to type it out. And you get that understanding and that willingness. And I think people light up because they see you're trying and not necessarily leaning into English or asking them if they know English. So, take it from me, this is a good opportunity to flex your muscle in terms of that area. But if you can prep for it, and if you're really serious about moving to, as I said, a country country where English is not the primary language, it's a good idea to just start a little bit here or there. It doesn't have to be extensive, hours long in classes every week, but just enough so that the key basic phrases are something that kind of roll off your tongue, or at least you understand it when you hear it. Another that I've said is an upside, but it's also a challenge, and that's the slower pace of life here. Now, don't get me wrong. I wanted a slower pace of life. I needed a slower pace of life, especially after the stress of coming off of my job and leaving that and deciding to move to another country. I really needed a place where I could settle and feel comfortable and start to reaffirm myself and regrow. Um, and so that was a part of the appeal. But I think it's different when you're actually living in it versus needing it and looking for it. Um, Also, I will say there is a big difference between a slower pace of life and unhurried to the point of unpredictability. And so, what I mean by that is, again, as I've said here in Mexico, people are really warm, they're really kind. But let's be honest, the idea of punctuality here, at least according to the American standard of punctuality, just really does not exist. It's different. Um, for instance, appointments might not happen on time, or to be honest, at all. Your deliveries may be delayed without warning. You're often trying to follow up with your service provider to see, are you coming? Are you coming today? Are you coming at all? As I said. And so often you're doing a lot more of the legwork that is almost on autopilot, especially in states where you get these notifications for different things. It can be frustrating when you're looking for something and that person or that thing doesn't show up. Also, things that take, let's say, 30 minutes in the US might take days here. And I'm not exaggerating. I've had service appointments, especially with a plumber, where he will say, I'm coming on Tuesday. Tuesday comes and goes. The established time comes. He's not there. Towards and then in the afternoon, I'll reach out. Oh, I got busy. I'll come on Thursday. Okay. Luckily for me, I work from home, so it's not that I'm having to leave something to come back. So I'm here, but you sit there on the Thursday and time comes and goes and you don't hear anything. And you're again left with the question of, okay, at what point do I contact them? What's going on? Do we need to reschedule at a time where they're not so busy? And the truth of the matter is you never know when they're not busy. Um, and so it it's interesting. And so sometimes people will say mañana. You hear that often when you're talking to someone about doing something. They'll be like, oh, yes, mañana, which means tomorrow. But you find very quickly it really does not mean tomorrow. It means whenever I get to it. Um, and so that is frustrating. And I can't sugarcoat that. Again, I'm trying to peel off the layers of my American way of thinking and operating, but it is and years of conditioning, to be honest. So it's not an easy thing, but is something that I intentionally have been doing because simply when you're in another place and this is how business is done, life is conducted, you have to adjust or you're in a constant state of frustration. But more importantly, this has forced me to ask myself, what is the rush? If it's not a true emergency, if there isn't water spilling everywhere, if there isn't a gas leak or something along those lines that need to be attended to, does it matter if it's today? Schedules may say yes, but in the position that I find myself in, is it really that big of a deal? Can I build in more margin and more time? Or now recognizing what I know to be true, knowing that if I ask someone, they may or may not show up that day, and not allowing it to irritate me, anger me, just accepting it as it is. Um, and ultimately, it helps me to think about, do I and can I let go of some of my hyper productive conditioning that is, again, by and large, a byproduct of the United States and how we operate. So it's a big shift in mindset. Huge, huge. And I'm still working on it, to be honest. There are days, despite the fact of knowing how things go, I'm still very upset if you say you're doing an appointment and literally I realize like at the end of the week, like, wait a minute, wasn't so and so supposed to be here? Okay. So it's still a trial. And I think also if I put it in the context of someone who's balancing parenthood and work, that lack of predictability can be a real challenge. So, for instance, I've had times I can't count where I need to either go drop my daughter off at school in the morning or pick her up in the afternoon. And those are the very times that the service professional wants to come. And even if I say, listen, I need to be away for this 15 to 20-minute period, they still seem to come right at that time when we're about to walk out the door or around the time when I'm like getting in the car. So, it is real. Again, it's a minor frustration. Most of the times, these individuals are really cool. They're like, "Okay, well, I can wait till you get back, no worries," and they'll sit in the car or whatever until I return. And so it's again that casual attitude where they're not upset because now you have them waiting. It just is what it is. But for those of us who are really microwave and rapid, 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 everything needs to happen in sequence. Um, that can be a deal breaker for some. Not for me, but definitely a learning curve. Um, Another big one that often doesn't get airplay, but I think should, is loneliness and the isolation from social transitions. Moving abroad can be deeply lonely, especially if you are starting over, if you're trying to rediscover yourself after leaving something behind in the States, whether it's family, friends, work, relationships, and particularly if you're unpartnered like I am. I'm not bringing a mate here who can be my sounding board when I'm upset or someone that I can um, have conversations with about the stresses of the day. And so that the familiarity, those touch points that you have where your go-to friends, your favorite restaurant or coffee shop that you go to and you meet people there, because you're there every Monday and certain people are there all the time. That family member who helps you out in a pinch, they're not there anymore. Those things almost disappear overnight. And so the truth of the matter is you miss your circle. You miss familiarity. You miss being known by people and not necessarily having to constantly make new acquaintances. And I think rebuilding those circles, especially with some of the language and cultural barriers that you experience when you go to another country, it takes time. And while I met some amazing people here, it takes time to build that village. It takes social connections that don't form overnight, and especially when you're parenting solo as I am and trying to juggle work, I can't lean into all the social events in order to go out and meet people and interact with them. Um, and some days, just let's be honest, you're just tired. You are just at a low ebb. It happens to the best of us, no matter whether you're in what one would perceive to be paradise, you still can be tired. And if that's the case, the loneliness does hit, and it sometimes hits differently during that time. It's not a good or bad thing, it just is. And so I have found that engaging in and participating in a lot of the local events does help me, but it still is a journey because, as I said, I can't necessarily go to each and every social event there is. And so that leaves me in instances where I'm like, oh, friends are talking about events back home, parties, birthdays, things like that, that I would love to be a part of, but I can't because I'm here. And it's okay. And often you get past those moments. And I will say one of the most interesting things for me is that because often US holidays are happening and there isn't a Mexican equivalent, it's just a normal day. So I have not been away because we've not been here for very long over and missed major, major holidays. But I will say, for instance, Memorial Day that just passed. I didn't think about it because it was just a regular day here. And I was talking to someone and she was like, yeah, we're going to the beach. And I was asking her, like, wow, you went to the beach this weekend randomly? And she was like, it's Memorial Day. And so that's the sort of thing where you don't necessarily miss the holidays. Now, again, if it's Christmas or Thanksgiving or things like that, there may be some of that missing. But luckily, last year I was able to do a friendsgiving at someone's home here who's American, and a number of people gathered. So I didn't necessarily feel lonely. I miss family and kind of those traditional models that we had, but I didn't necessarily feel alone because it wasn't just me and my daughter sitting at home. But for people who really are sociable and extroverted, and it takes you, and perhaps you are trying to jump into the mix but it's taking you a while, that could really impact you. So I caution people that, as they say, know thyself. If you are an introvert, it's probably not going to be as bad because you're likely going to be inward anyway. But if you are someone who does crave attention, and not in a bad way, but just kind of the attention of people in conversation, then you're going to potentially struggle. But then, more importantly, as I said, even with falling anywhere in that gamut, you're going to feel that momentary pang for home. And as I said, the familiarity. And so just bracing yourself and recognizing when it comes, pick up the phone, send a text, do a FaceTime with someone so that you have that connection, you see them, you get the thing you need in that moment, and then the moment passes. Another related thing to that social isolation is, for me, solo single parenting. I think many people can agree single parenting is tough anywhere, but abroad, it's next level. As I said before, no backups. Your person who would normally do your easy childcare may not be there. Your system that you use to do childcare may not be there. The grandparents are not nearby. And being the only caregiver for my daughter has amazingly beautiful moments. We get to explore lots of things together on our own terms, um, without having to get input or weigh in and things like that. But it's also exhausting because you are the first at the and the last stop. I think the recognition that similarly, as I said, just not having the easy backups when I need to run an errand, when I need to go to an appointment, or just take a break, or God forbid, sick, as I am recovering from a cold now. And so you have moments when you're just physically tired, but you still have to be on. You still have to get your child where they need to be, whether it's school or other activities. Um, and so that's daunting. And I'll be honest, finding reliable childcare here isn't impossible, but it's not automatic either. There is no trusted list or sitter app that you can dial into like you can back in the States. And if it exists, I'm not aware of it at this time. And so it's not as simple as being able to look at nanny.com or something like that and find someone who can come in whenever you need them. And I think it's important to note again culturally the setup of family units here in Mexico, where external childcare really isn't needed because you often have extended families that live near each other, if not with one another. So you have the aunties or the grandparents. Nearby or trusted close friends. And so I don't think the model of childcare as we have it in the States really exists here. And I don't want to generalize, but that's been my experience for most people is that there are units where their children, just like their elders, are usually taken care of in kind of the home setting. So you have to ask around, so asking, using your words, you can't necessarily be introverted in this. And whether that asking around is in person or if it's on Facebook in different groups or things like that, you do have to seek information out. I think you have to build trust slowly. You have to learn people, they have to learn you. You have to go with your instincts on a lot of things, but that takes time. I think word of mouth is everything, but it remains trial and error. Someone who has an amazing sitter for them may not work for you. You may have issues, again, if you're not in a primarily English speaking place where your sitter doesn't speak English. So you have a situation where you have someone who can care for your child, but if you or your child isn't fluent in Spanish, you're at a disadvantage. For me, it's okay. I have my phone. We can talk through Google Translate. But when I walk out the door, and they're trying to communicate with my child or to engage her in some way other than physically just being present to make sure she's okay, it's very difficult. So those are the sorts of things that you have to factor in. But overall, despite the highs and lows of the single parent experience here, I have to say my daughter's thriving. I am thriving. Yes, challenges, but still thriving. My daughter's probably learning Spanish faster than I am as she's in a bilingual school and she gets to lean into speaking it and hearing it every day. Whereas because I'm at home, I get to elect whether I'm going out and having conversations with people, or if there's someone in my home working with me, if I want to test out my Spanish. So she's in a place where she's hearing it and absorbing it like a sponge, and she's speaking it in some, in different fashions. So I'm excited for her in that. Um, She's braver than I expected. We have had a tremendous year of change, lots of stuff. We've literally taken her from the school she knew. We've taken her from the family structure and all the friends around us that she knew, our home, all of these things. And yet she picks up every day and goes to school and learns and does and is inquisitive and all of the things. And so I'm so proud of her because she's teaching me how to adapt as well. All of these things were planned things for me, but I didn't know how they would play out. But seeing the world through her eyes helps me to, as I say, fight another day. Um, so that is important to recognize if you are a parent coming with your children to another country, there's lots and lots and lots of adjustments. Can I say it's absolutely easy? And just in case that cut out for a bit, can I say it's absolutely easy if you're in a partner relationship? I don't know. That's not my circumstance, but it likely is because at a minimum, if you're tired, if you need to take a walk around the block or drive somewhere, you can tap out and your partner can tap in. So there's a benefit, but I do think that just recognizing the challenges in this place. Um, and so I wanted to be honest because behind all of the wonderful Facebook posts or the Instagram smiles, there are also periods of true overwhelm. I think if parents are honest, this is happening back at home in the States, but sometimes the magnitude of it, when you're factoring in, as I said, the loneliness, the social isolation, and the other adjustments are things that people really need to consider. And to, if not, I don't know if you can prep for it, but just to recognize when those feelings come and you're experiencing it, that it's normal and you'll be okay. Along the lines of service people, as I said before, accessing services and the daily systems that are around you. Um, Finding what you need takes work. You need a plumber, you need a doctor, you need a tutor for your kid, you need any sort of thing. To me, from my experience so far, there is no one central hub to find trustworthy recommendations. There is no Facebook. I'm sorry. There is no Yelp. There's no TripAdvisor. There are no major suggestions like that where it's a one-stop shop where you can get all the information you need. Um, so you find that services are sometimes not online either. You may get their WhatsApp number. You may have to call by phone. And so you're not certain of the information that you have. Is that business still there? Are the hours still correct? And things like that. So often you have to rely on Facebook groups. You have to rely on your new friends and colleagues, neighbors, or other local connections that you make to get information. As I said, Google, Yelp, things like that won't necessarily help you as easily here. Um, I think most recommendations are passed around in local WhatsApp groups or Facebook forums if you're lucky. And also, if you're not fluent and you don't know the right keywords to search for stuff in Spanish, because it may be a very different phrase, and so you're often going to Google Translate just to get some sense of what the word is, it's like stumbling in the dark. And even if you do find someone who's good, they might be overbooked. They may not speak English. And so again, we go into the language barriers, or they may not be available this week, next week, the week after. So a lot of this just daily living, the activities to either set up your home or maintain your home or your life or the various processes that you have, really requires time. It requires research, it requires patience, and a whole heck of a lot of trial and error, as I said before, that many of us just simply don't budget for because we have not had to. If you've never lived abroad, you never had to do or think that way. For those of you who have lived abroad, a lot of this stuff comes easier. It may be different, it may be a little bit more difficult in some places than others, but you at least get the ebbs and flows of how processes work when they're not as automated, as I said before, based on the expectations of US people. Um, Another key connected area is acculturation and culture shock. This ties into, again, some of these language challenges, some of the ways of doing business in the slower pace of life. Some of it's about how services are accessed. But It's hard to explain unless you've lived it. Acculturation is real. I think culture shock isn't just a one-time thing. It's a series of micro adjustments. You have to think about different values, different rhythms, different norms, and different ways of just living life and doing business. Um, I think it has also required me to unlearn a lot of parts of myself that worked and worked well in the US. Or maybe they didn't work well, but they were the way I live life. Um, like how direct I am in communications with people or in emails, how quickly I expect a reply. And then there are days when I just want things to feel familiar and they don't. To hear, let's say, my music in the grocery store on the local radio stations, and you recognize that you're not there. To be able to laugh at inside jokes without having to ask for explanations for what it is. Um, those are the sorts of things that, as you think about culture and what life looks like and what the norms are in different places, you may or may not be prepared for it. I've talked before about the pluses of going with my daughter on the weekend and seeing families together and at the parks or, grocery shopping or at the malls together and just in units and moving in that way. And often in the US, we're not seeing full family units together doing things unless it's a celebration or a holiday or something like that. And so you recognize that what is normal here could be normal in other places, but it may not be your norm. And so some call it culture shock, but I think for me, it's more about just a quiet, ongoing bit of disorientation. Not bad, just different. Feeling like I'm constantly adapting, constantly learning and unlearning and doing things differently, recognizing what's important in one culture may not be as important for us. The work till you die mentality and the timeliness and you must do this and all of this, and all the judgments that we put on ourselves that often are equated to our employment and our productivity don't necessarily exist here. I think people kind of work to live, but they're not living to work. And so it takes a different meaning when people are settling in and enjoying life. And you recognize that maybe we need to do that a little bit more too. So while it is a challenge, while it does provide those little mini shocks, as I said, often it gives me pause and think like, huh, does life need to be like that in the States? Does life need to be like that here? And there may not be a true answer on either one of those, but it does help you to think. And then another major, major thing that I like to say is the elephant in the room with a tutu and a pair of high heel shoes dancing in the corner. And that's just being Black abroad. I think we have now a growth of Black YouTubers and others who share their travel experiences and their live abroad experiences. And so I'm so excited when I run across those channels and those people and their families and other things just to learn more about them and their experiences. But often I think, we can take for granted what it means to move through the world, and especially through the expat experience as a Black person, for me as a Black woman. So anywhere we go, often our perceived, and I make that very clear, our perceived otherness often enters the room before we do. Living abroad does not change that. It just shifts, I think, how it shows up. Um, in many, many ways, being outside of the United States has been liberating and freeing. I'm not constantly bracing for the next headline. I get to self select and turn on if I want to hear the news of the day or look at a television channel to see what's going on. Um, I'm not swimming in the same cycles of trauma based on what is happening in the world around me that often feels that for people who look like me are they're the recipients of whatever the ill treatment is. I've had fewer moments of fear just simply walking down the street with my daughter and not necessarily worrying, embracing when a car drives by of, oh, what are they going to do anything to us or nothing like that. I have less fear about finding myself in the wrong place or the wrong neighborhood or things like that. Yes, there are safety issues and you should be vigilant everywhere you go. In Mexico, even San Miguel is not perfect. So when I say drive into the wrong neighborhoods, I think you can always end up a place you don't need to be, but it's not a perennial fear of the driving while black. And what is the perception if I happen to be somewhere and someone doesn't recognize me or understand why I'm there? Um, and so it just it doesn't mean though that challenges disappear being in another country. As I said, I think, to be perfectly honest, in Mexico as well as really in many parts of the world, blackness can still be a relatively rare, misunderstood, or exoticized concept, based on what people have seen on TV. So even a big place like Mexico City, yes, we are there, and there are quite a lot of us. Um, but you're also in a city of 10 million with 10 more million in the suburbs. So no matter how many thousands you are, you're still a drop in the bucket. And so often, what does that look like internationally versus the States? Well, I think you sometimes just get the stares that linger a little too long, or you may get the literal kind of double take, like, whoa. But the difference here is that it's not necessarily a whoa and a frown of, oh my God, what are you doing here? Get out. It is just generally like, man, they are here. They're in real life. So you get more of that fascination, I think, than anything. But you also get curious questions that can cross boundaries. And let's be honest, even from some of the expats that I've run across, some of the other Americans or Canadians who may not wear this black skin that I have, you get questions. And it's the tone of questions sometimes, such as, well, how did you get here? What do you do? How are you making a living, basically to live abroad? And so those things can be very off-putting. You can choose how you answer them and the energy you give them, but it could be that there is some otherness there. It could be genuine curiosity. It just depends on the day. But often I try to take a cue from the tone of the person. And a lot of times I found, at least the local Mexicans I've encountered, they're genuinely just asking because they're curious to know how you got here. Again, I cannot say that is the case with some of the expats that I've run across, but for the most part, there has been just a genuine curiosity, but that can be off-putting to you when you're just like, wow, I feel objectified sometimes when I go and do and be in ways that you may not be comfortable with. I have had, and I've heard from my daughter, people touching her hair and her braids and, asking questions about it. I have yet to have anyone to touch me. Um, I've had a couple of people who were acquaintances who've asked me about my hair and, asked permission or something like that. But for the most part, I've not been unsolicitedly touched. But we've heard, especially in some of the Asian countries, that happens a lot. So if you're triggered by someone in your space, number one, by someone touching you very familiarly without asking for permission, you may, depending on what country you're going to, try to figure out how to brace yourself for that, because I think what we consider something that's very offensive, the boundaries and things like that, that just doesn't exist for some people. And just recognizing that and seeing how it is going to affect you and make you feel. And if you're going to feel argumentative or aggressive um, after those issues and instances, you may have to check yourself a little bit in terms of, okay, am I really ready to be in a place where I may be othered more often than not? And then, to be honest, your otherness also can mean being ignored, being questioned, or passed over in ways that you're not quite certain if it is intentional or if it's just, again, just the kind of lackadaisical way that people may do business or in restaurants, the slowness of the process. And so sometimes you find yourself questioning a lot of instances. Um, and I'll say most of the time I do not, at least in my experiences, have not found it to be hostile, but it still can feel alienating and it can be tiring. I think there's just a hyper visibility that we carry as Black people. And it doesn't turn off just because we're smiling and really friendly or we're successful or we think we're blending in with the crowd. It still can be there. And it's almost like a background hum that can shape your every interaction. And so the reality is you decide if you're going to mute it and turn it down some, or you're going to make it a thing each and every time. Um, so what I've learned, and I think this ties into the joyfulness of celebrating Juneteenth today, is that being Black abroad is important because representation matters. When I see another Black person here, running across them on the street, in a store, in a restaurant, whether they're a local, an expat, some visitor, something, I am waving, I'm smiling, I'm nodding, something for recognition. And 9 times out of 10, they're doing the exact same thing. It's very rare that I see someone, they make eye contact with me and they turn their head. Often in those instances, I assume perhaps they're not a Black American. Perhaps they're Black from some other country. And that connection, that nod that we traditionally do as Black Americans, it may not be a thing. And so again, I try not to personalize it, but if I can help it, I'm going out of my way to make sure that I'm acknowledging that person when I see them and know that I see you. Hey, we're in this space together. Community is the oxygen you breathe. As I said before about the loneliness and family and isolation, whether online or in person, finding spaces where I don't have to explain my existence is invaluable. For me to just be in a space with a bunch of sisters and brothers, and we can do references and cultural things that not everybody may get it, but a lot of times you're like, yep, I know what you're talking about. It's so powerful. I remember about a month or so ago, I went to a friend's birthday party, and most of the women in the room had seen the movie Sinners. And just hearing the tapestry unfolding through their words of the experiences of looking at the movie and all the references and significance they took away from it, it filled me with so much joy. I had not seen the movie, but I was breaking my neck to get to it after the conversations they had because there was just something, it was almost like an awakening and how we can interact and we relay things in such a similar fashion that is almost like food to the soul. So I suggest, and I've said this before in other videos, find community. It doesn't have to be all expats, but if you are a person of color, it may be helpful to touch bases with your community. Not all the time, because let's be honest, sometimes people do come with drama, but just in ways that if you need that pick me up, that reminder of who you are, you can tap into it, then you can step out. And I think also being Black abroad, we recognize joy is ours. Even when we're the only one in the space, even when we are in just, in encounters where it may feel familiar, but not, we're not alone. You have a community behind you. And more importantly, you get to bring your full self into whatever that situation is. You get to bring your resilience, your softness, your experiences, your intuition, all of those things you have, they come with you wherever you go. And that is a beautiful thing about wearing the skin. And so I will say that if you're Black and you're considering this move, just know that there will be moments when you're out in this world that will remind you that you're different. And I think many of us just recognize that for what it is. But you get to decide how that difference is carried out, where it finds rest, and what you accept. And so I challenge us, we can and we must unapologetically take up space. I think we need to define ourselves on our own terms, and we need to live life as we see fit wherever we choose to live that. And that's really, truly important. And for those who've had the benefit of traveling extensively or living in other countries, it just, you're bringing your footprint with you and you're leaving it behind. And so do that as you see fit, take as you need to take, and leave as you need to leave it. And just really quickly, a few other common challenges. They're not necessarily things that have been at my personal top list, but I do know that they're very real, and I hear it from other expats who've talked about their experiences. One, bureaucracy. Whether it's paperwork around the visas and residency, whether you're dealing with taxes when you're buying a house or a car, school forms. Often these things are in Spanish. Often these things are very contradictory. The process can be very slow. You are a lot of times having to go in person for these things. And for many of us who shudder at the thought of standing in front of someone, talking to them, it is daunting to imagine having to go to an office where you don't understand the language anyway, and you're trying to communicate big business, as I say, um, to people and to make sure that there are no misinterpretations, no misunderstandings, no mistakes. And so it is challenging to be in that setting. For many people, they lean into facilitators and others whose their job is, I speak Spanish, I know the system, I can navigate certain things for you. And for some people, they're like, no, I'll do it on my own. But for many of us, using facilitators doesn't cost a lot. And so it may be worth it for you to lose some of your headaches and the hassle of trying to go it at your own, especially if you are having to go back and forth to a place because of some perceived mistake and you're not even certain if you're getting what the mistake is in order to correct it. So sometimes having someone that can help you do it the first time is really important. For some people, healthcare complexity. If you're coming and let's say you have a chronic condition or you are potentially prone to illnesses, you may be worried about how am I going to get help? If you're a resident in a country, you may have access to that country's health insurance and their hospital systems. The question is, if it's a public system, is it up to the standards that you deem appropriate based on, let's say, your home country? In some instances, it's not. Um, so you then have to say, am I going to do private insurance? Am I going to be paying out of pocket? Will this doctor understand me and fully get what the issue is? Will they be able to take the medication that let's say I have in the States and give me an equivalent here in Mexico? I can say, in my own experience, I have struggled with a specific medication I have that just the combination does not seem to exist here in Mexico. My workaround has been to pay out of pocket whenever I go back to the state, getting 3 to 6 months worth of supply. And dealing with that. Sometimes you can go to a doctor and they can try to do a calibration to figure out another similar medication, but sometimes for people, that's just too much. They want to stick with their reliable. And unless your medication costs hundreds and hundreds of dollars in the States, it may be worth it to you to just lean into getting a larger supply if you travel from the States or if you have people traveling to come visit you. Um, I think banking, money, always an issue. Are you going to have a local bank? Are you going to rely on your US bank accounts? If you are not making income, let's say in that country, in my case, Mexico, you may not need a Mexican bank account. If all of the work you do, your clients are US based, you're going to have US taxes and all those things. You may be fine with just doing money transfers into your from your local account. Pulling out money from the local banks here with affiliates. Those are things you'd need to do a little bit of research on to make sure you understand. But for some people, especially if you're going to be building a house or you're making major renovations, those contractors want to be paid in cash. So you may have daily limits of what you can get for money. So that may mean you're at the bank every single day trying to get enough money to pay that contractor for the work that they're going to do, whether for that day, that week, or whatever the period is. And so for some people, just that sort of microaggression of, oh my gosh, literally at the bank because I can't get enough out um, can really irritate some people. I think, as I said, with being Black abroad, there are some of those things around the microaggressions, the exoticism that you may get. And so just bracing yourself for how you're going to experience that. And I won't say more about that because I just talked about it at length, but that is something that I think people need to be aware of. Even perhaps a woman in a country where it's maybe male dominated, where you don't know how to navigate. And so the experiences you have with people may may be triggering or difficult for you. And so just recognizing that there may be systems in place that do not operate the way it does for you at home. And then stuff as simple as weather or infrastructure. Power outages can be frequent in places. Water shutoffs, dealing with a wet season versus a dry season for some people, and they're accustomed to kind of the four seasons of the year. There are benefits to all of those things, and there are true cons. For instance, here in San Miguel, it's normally a very temperate place. It's in the basin, between kind of with mountains surrounding. So that means when the sun is sitting on top, the sun is sitting, and it's really, really hot during the dry season. Traditionally, though, and when I say really, really hot, I it's usually hot a certain number of months, maybe April to May, possibly June, um, and then it's not. However, you don't have central heating and air conditioning, at least here. And so, if you're one of those people that are perhaps going through the change of life for my older sisters, you're going to struggle potentially. So, a lot of people are doing workarounds where they're getting mini split units to give you some heating and cooling or things like that. And so, recognizing, okay, is temperature really important to me? And if I can't have access to the heating and cooling systems that I'm used to, is that going to bother me? Maybe, maybe not. But those are some of the things that you really do need to consider. Is this going to make life on a day-to-day basis challenging for me? It may be every day, it may be short term, it may be something that just recurs just depending on whatever the issue is. And so none of these things are often deal breakers for people, but I think they're definitely not the things that show up in travel brochures, and we experience them as we get them, and you recognize whether it's going to work for you or not. And so those were just a number of the things that I found that I think, if we're being real about the travel abroad, the live abroad experience, and not necessarily just whitewashing it. And as I said, given those wonderful Facebook montages, those um, you know, um, Instagram photo collages and things like that, where it looks like every day is perfect and everything's so awesome. It's not. And you recognize that, but you also know that, for me, living abroad as a solo mom, a Black woman, and a whole human, quite frankly, trying to navigate life, the beautiful complexity of it, um, it's not easy. It's a bold, it's an unfiltered adventure. Many things pop up that I just literally didn't even know, so I couldn't necessarily prep for it. Um, and as I said, there are things like the language barrier. There's the cultural gaps. There's the emotional peaks and valleys that you get. And there are just moments of deep uncertainty as you say, okay, does this work for me? Do I need to pivot to that? And ultimately trying to figure out things sometimes in real time. Um, but there are also those wonderful sunlight, or sunsets on the rooftop, and wonderful cocktails and new friendships that really feel deep and meaningful. And often it just shows you strength that you did not even know you had, because you've never had to show that strength. So ultimately, for anyone who is dreaming of this life, I say come with your eyes wide open. I want you to come prepared to be humbled. Come prepared to be changed. Come prepared to be challenged. But also know that in coming, you are here. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to ask for help, and you're allowed to rewrite the rules of what home and life and living look like for you, and not necessarily doing direct comparisons all the time to your home country, because I think people can get into that fallacy of, well, in the US we did this, and oh my God, why did they do that? And if you're constantly making those mental or verbal comparisons, you will drag yourself down, and you will get bogged. I think you will get bogged down a bit in terms of what's better, worse versus what's different. Um, so I challenge you to do all of those things and to keep that in mind. So thank you all for being here with me today. If this resonated with you in any way, please, please, please drop a comment, and share your own experiences or questions you have. Please subscribe and seek more, I guess, unfiltered conversations for me about my life, my identity, my mother and abroad, my work as I develop my own business and things like that. And already for those who are living abroad, let me know in the comments, what challenges have you faced that have been particularly difficult, or things that you're still working on, or things that, as I said, recur that just kind of irritate you. I love to hear it. Um, and so I say thank you again for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who you know is thinking about this journey for themselves. I think until next time, please be kind and treat yourself well. And again, to my friends who celebrated, happy, happy, happy Juneteenth.